Is Penn State about to become Iowa State 2.0? Because there's over 40 Cyclone players currently in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
That is right. It is a Locked On crossover between Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On the Portal. My name is Seyko, and I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. He is Brian Smith, host of the Portal. He's the college football expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the recruiting expert, the Portal expert, as that's what we're talking about in today's show. We're also going to talk about D'Anton Lynn, an elite move to hire Lynn. But what does it mean truly for Penn State? Names to know. We're going to go over specific names that Penn State should be trying to retain, but also to target in the portal, regardless of Iowa State or any other connections. But how will Penn State attack the portal? Because there is one position group they absolutely need. Brian, you know where I'm going with this. But 40 players from Iowa State currently are expected to transfer. Are they all going to go to Penn State? Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 Eastern Time. Brian, over 40 players from Iowa State. Penn State, here we're having this conversation again. They need, if Penn State wants to be any good next season, they need defensive linemen. There's a couple players that Penn State should try to retain that are already currently in Happy Valley, but we'll get to that in just a second. 40 plus Iowa State players. I imagine a good chunk of them are going to follow Matt Campbell to Penn State. You know what? I'm not really, I actually kind of like the idea of this because you can build out the roster by adding the best of Iowa State and retaining the best of Penn State.
It is a very odd circumstance because I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this. Coaches leave schools all the time, but how many of them are going to be going to one school? I mean, 40 guys?
Yeah.
Can you think of another school that's and I feel bad for the Cyclone faithful. That's rough, but what was it? 10 years Matt was there or something like that? I mean, those players signed on with Matt. So Matt Campbell is now in Happy Valley. So I guess I shouldn't be all that shocked, but this is wild. Even if they got, let's say, 15 players from there, if they got 10 of the best and then 5 guys that are backups, Penn State can win 8 games just pretty much rolling the ball out.
With that schedule, absolutely. That should be the floor.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So, again, it depends on which guys it is. But if it's 10 of the upper echelon players from Iowa State mixed in with the guys that Penn State's going to retain, and you get, I don't know, 2 or 3 other good players from the portal just randomly, like everybody else, why couldn't Penn State be 9-3, 10-2? Quarterback's still the big question, and that'll take care of itself. But the roster should be a lot better than what I originally thought until I looked at that Iowa State portal list. It's very, very long.
Oh, it's extremely extensive. And I imagine the same thing's going to happen somewhat with Washington State following their head coach who now takes over at Iowa State. But that's not what we're going to talk about here. Okay, well, if Iowa State, here's what people are immediately going to fire back with. Zach, you shouldn't be excited about Penn State becoming Iowa State 2.0 because that was an 8-4 team. That was that they were middle of the road last season. Why would you want that team in Happy Valley? I don't just want the Iowa State players to all follow to Penn State. You're going to have to get other select players from other schools that are in the portal as well. But the idea is to retain, it's to build out a whole comprehensive roster. Brian, part of the reason that Iowa State struggled when it did is because they lost starter after starter at injuries, and they didn't have the depth. But if you bring in a bulk of the Iowa State roster, combine it with some of the key players that were either crucial to the depth or starters. We're already seeing Penn State retain some starting caliber players. So if Iowa State's biggest problem was that they couldn't compete with NIL and the transfer portal when it came to the depth chart. They had a lot of quality starters, but the second those, Rocco Becht was playing with a torn labrum. Honestly, I think both of his shoulders were hurt last season. Then you lose not one, but 2 superstar defensive backs in the same week leading up to the week 4 game. And after that, that's when Iowa State went on its 4-game losing streak. So the idea is that you can build a comprehensive depth chart with most of these players. You're not going to get all 40 of them. You're going to get a lot of them, but you're going to get players that are either going to be starting caliber or guys that are just going to rotate in frequently. If Matt Campbell's got to be able to convince everybody on the vision, like, hey, you are going to have to compete for snaps. But if you can get them all to Happy Valley and keep some of those star players that are already there, look, this is the formula. This is the blueprint to having a successful season in year one for Matt Campbell.
It seems like a pretty smart plan. Look at it this way, and I'm not saying it's going to have the same overall effect, but when Curt Cignetti came from James Madison, they brought 13 guys. That's as high a hit rate as we've ever seen in college football, but they went to the playoff year one, and 8 of those guys remained. Indiana went undefeated and hasn't been beaten yet this year. So having plug and play matters. Just saying, oh, we got X number of portal players, that's not the accurate definition of that situation. And it potentially, in some capacity, could play out at Penn State because, like, their defense is not friendly to learn. And I'm being very kind. It's a lot of different zone stuff, a lot of different fronts. It would really behoove them to get several defensive players in particular. Obviously, if Rocco Becht comes, plug and play because that was your quarterback. Like, all these things matter because instead of worrying about install all day, you can have some of those guys be your starters, at least initially, until the players at Penn State start to learn it and there's more competition. That's a win-win. I think that it would be massive for Penn State if they could even get 10 of those guys because they can help the other players at Penn State learn what's going on and pick it up. It's such a major advantage.
So Penn State is going to become Iowa State 2.0 by proxy. But again, the idea is to combine the best of both worlds for Matt Campbell. Now, part of that equation is going to be hitting on defensive line. Brian, we have this conversation now 2 off seasons in a row. It was part of the downfall, not the entire reason, but defensive line not performing as well as it could have and should have because there was limited depth. Jim Knowles' defense didn't really set them up for success. But once again, here we are. But Penn State is in, I think, an even much worse situation with already losing Chaz Coleman. Okay? He's expected to go to Ohio State. That doesn't matter. It's the fact that he's in the portal regardless of where he goes. Deion Barnes, the defensive line coach, is headed to South Carolina. So you're truly going through a defensive line reset. The only players that I think are really worth trying to retain, and that's a big if, Ivan Kamaju, who would be a second-year defensive end. Max Granville, who's coming off of a season-ending leg injury from last season. Can you keep him around? He's a former 4-star player. I think he could be a potential star in Penn State's defense if he returns fully healthy. And then Xavier Gilliam, Jalen Harvey has some upside. And again, you know who's going to try to target them and potentially, and the hope is that they go into the portal? James Franklin. A lot of the players that I named, Xavier Gilliam, Jalen Harvey, Ivan Kamaju, they're all from the state of Maryland. James is going to try to get that he would hope. Again, you're not supposed to tamper. Okay, I'm not trying to imply that. Bottom line in here, Brian, Penn State's going to need defensive linemen from everywhere. Penn State, Iowa State, anywhere else. They are going to be targeting defensive ends, defensive tackles because they just need players.
Yeah, but as you noted, and rightfully so, they need D linemen. So does everybody. This, by the way, if Penn State's not tampering, they're going to lose. I know that's not the Penn State way, but like if you're not tampering, you have no chance in today's world. None. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. To that end, players still talk to coaches from other schools all the time. I talk to kids all the time about this.
Agents are having all the conversations.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's direct. It's just this world, there is no loyalty. Let's be clear. To that end, Penn State needs 1 or 2 guys. I'm not saying you're getting Chaz in the portal, but you're going to get somebody that has some experience, maybe 1 or 2 of the Iowa State kids. I'll be curious to see if they can get a playmaker, though. If you have a true playmaker, think about Iowa State. They schematically just bludgeon people with the big play. They'd give up yards, but they would bend but don't break, etc. They didn't get guys like Chaz. I mean, Chaz only had like 1 sack last year, but he was rotating in with some other really good players. This year, he'd have been a 10-sack guy, in my opinion, because he was so athletic. Wherever he goes, he'll probably be like that. Can they get somebody that's at least half that good and rotate other players in? Because at Penn State, you can get more players like that. If you add that level of athlete to what I expect Iowa State's going to run schematically, I assume they're still going to run something similar because it's pain to deal with. That would be very, very interesting.
Well, Penn State going through a lot of changes. Okay, so we've laid it out, the blueprint of how Penn State needs to attack the transfer portal, not only with player retention and player addition. There are the names that Penn State's going to have on its priority list. We'll give you some of those names coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new. Boosts, bonuses, surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect. It's right before the games, right before the weekend starts. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Brian, I could throw out dozens of names, both at Penn State currently, players that they need to target at Iowa State, again, especially if they're going to go on the defensive line. We've already mentioned those defensive linemen, Max Granville, Xavier Gilliam, Jalen Harvey, right? Those are guys that you want to retain. We can have our quarterback debate again. I don't think it's going to be over until it's actually settled. Do you go with Rocco Becht or do you go with Ethan Grunkemeyer? So with all that being said, though, I do want to focus on a select, just kind of some more select individuals that need to be highlighted in this conversation. And at the time of this recording, some things could change. Some guys could go into the portal. Some guys could also announce their decision to stay at Penn State. Cooper Cousins, a potential starting, I know he's going to start. He's going to be a starting offensive lineman in 2026, announced his intention to stay. Owen Alasini, another high upside offensive lineman who could potentially start at tackle, announced his intention to stay. I think of other players, Brian, that I want to start with at Penn State. Kobe Howard, you know Kobe Howard all too well from your connections down in Florida. That's where he's from. He could be wide receiver number one, or at least be one of the top two wide receivers going into next season. Speaking of pass catchers, Andrew Rapplier, Luke Reynolds, a former 4- and 5-star tight end, respectively. You don't have to go into the portal when you have some of these key players already. And that's just the offensive side. Flip it over to the defense. Tony Rojas, Amari Campbell, you have a star dynamic duo at linebacker when you're installing a new defense with D'Anton Lynn coming over, who we're going to talk about in the next segment. Penn State has plenty of players that they need to prioritize here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. With Lynn coming over, I still expect them to run some of that Iowa State stuff that's crazy and mix.
It'll be a hybrid.
Yeah, and he's a good coordinator, and he's a heck of a recruiter. Yeah, he's got ties now to both coasts because he played at Penn State, he coached at USC, coached at UCLA. This will be fun. I'm curious to see how much impact he has with the portal recruiting. I don't really, no offense to other schools, but there are certain schools I don't pay much attention to because it's so easy to recruit there. USC is one of them. A moron could recruit to USC because of its location. Like seriously, it's just a joke. But now he's at Penn State and he's back on the East Coast. How many of the ties does he pull into? Does he know some of the smaller schools back east? Maybe he gets an Ivy League kid that I have no idea. We know they're going to get a ton of the Iowa State kids, and that's low-hanging fruit and some really good players. But can he get somebody maybe from USC? Maybe he gets somebody that played against in the Big Ten that gets in the portal and he watched their film. That's something that's very common for teams. You play against somebody and he does well against you. Later on, you see they're in the portal and you're like, hey, I know this guy's good because he did well against the team that I represent. Yeah. So I'm curious to see what Lynn does because he's known as a recruiter. He's a guy that's been able to get some good players, and USC's recruiting class kind of speaks to that. Now let's see what he could do for Penn State in short order. What I'm asking is a lot. It's not fair, but that's the cards that Penn State has, quite honestly, been dealt. And he didn't have to take on that responsibility. He just helped put together the number one class at USC. He could have easily stayed.
Yeah.
He chose to come. So he wants that challenge. This is really fascinating.
We'll talk about it more in segment 3 because I don't anticipate that there's going to be a lot of player movement, maybe even not even coach movement. We'll see. Okay, there's one or two names that again we'll discuss later on, but D'Anton Lynn isn't necessarily the player recruiter again that a position coach will be, but he's your closer that he can comprehensively, he seals the deal with commits that, do I really want to be at now Penn State, but do I really want to be at USC? Do I want to go somewhere else? And that's where D'Anton Lynn comes in to seal the deal. So he's going to be a major factor when it comes to player retention with all of those guys that I named. Okay. If you don't want the defensive line to completely flip over and you're starting from level 1, you're going to have to keep all of those names that I mentioned at Penn State. Then, I didn't even get to the secondary of players that I would like to see. Since Lynn's now coming over from USC, Darius Dixon, who's from California, modern day, really talented defensive back, probably your starting corner next season if Penn State's able to keep him. Somebody like King Mack. Okay, so Penn State, like I said, has talented players. Then when you look at who's in the portal for Iowa State so far, the first ones that come to mind immediately are going to be the stars. Okay. Benjamin Bramer, he's a star at tight end. Well, Penn State has Andrew Rapplier and presumably Luke Reynolds. One way or another, Penn State is in a win-win situation where even if you lose, let's just, for example, I'd like them to keep Andrew Rapplier, but say he goes in the portal, right? Then you focus on keeping Luke Reynolds, and then you add Ben Bramer. Or flip it around. Andrew Rapplier stays. You have Luke Reynolds ends up moving on. Then you get Ben Bramer. Okay, so there are options here where it's a win-win. Ethan Grunkemeyer, say he decides to move on. You got Rocco Becht. You got Alex Mansky. In the secondary, Penn State has turnover in the secondary. Every top defensive back from Iowa State last season, both the guys who were healthy and ended up missing the season, Jontez Williams, Jeremiah Cooper, Marcus Neal, those are all 3 plug-and-play starters that Penn State should want regardless whether the room is stacked already or they have availability.
Yeah, bring on the competition, allow the chips to fall where they may. It's going to be, like you said earlier, Lynn's going to bring some of his philosophy. I'm sure that the staff that was brought over from Iowa State, they were really successful, and they didn't get the player or the caliber of player that SC did. They're going to blend it, so bringing in guys from different places is going to work, and Lynn's a very good coordinator. They'll figure it out under that overall group. I imagine that'll be a pretty good collection. I think this is kind of exciting. This is what makes college football, at least some of the time. I don't like all things about the portal. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things about the portal I don't like.
You cover it.
Yeah, but let's be honest. It's exciting, but this is one of the few times I think it's a win. Because it's cool for some of those Iowa State kids that don't get any exposure. No offense, but where they're at, they're just not going to get it. Penn State's big-time football, and it's at the Big Ten. It's upper echelon, new coach. Some of these guys are going to get a chance to shine. It'll probably help their opportunity to make it to the National Football League. So it's a win for both institutions, really.
Brian, if I am being genuine. I'm being honest. I'm not trying to hype up Iowa State players just to make Penn State, they got Matt Campbell. So I have to go out of my way to basically be PR to say, no, Penn State's going to be competitive. Benjamin Bramer can start at a lot of other places. Jeremiah Cooper, Jontez Williams, Carson Hansen, the running back, who had 13 touchdowns his second season, and then last season nearly eclipsed 1,000 yards. Bruising running back at 6'2", 220 pounds. These are guys that are capable of, at a minimum, being key contributors. Are they all bona fide starters, all conference guys right out of the gate? Not necessarily, but they're all guys that can play in the Big Ten. They can contribute one way or another, whether they're an everyday starter, they take a bulk of the workload, or this is a guy that rotates in, because Penn State, I know this was, we'll see how Matt Campbell truly operates, because he's never had this situation where you could have all this depth. James Franklin had all the depth where he could rotate 20 plus players in on offense and defense, and you really don't miss much. There's not much of a talent gap. Matt Campbell's never really been in that situation where the starting running back is light years ahead of the backup running back. The first string offensive line is miles ahead of the backup offensive line. You are now going to finally have that leverage where, and it's attrition, it's everything else. The guys don't have to play as many snaps. They can stay fresh for a long season, a long grueling season. It really came down to Matt Campbell just didn't have the depth at Iowa State, and now he will at Penn State.
Yeah, that's why Iowa State oftentimes faded at the end of seasons, or they would have one game where they had a few extra guys banged up.
No chance.
Yeah, I mean, there's no nice way to say it. That old saying is true. It's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes, especially in November. So, you're playing Texas on the road or Oklahoma on the road in November. That's rough. So they oftentimes ran into that, and they were still competitive, Kansas State, et cetera, but that's difficult. He won't have that problem for much longer. And as we'll talk about in the next segment, like in another year or so, they'll have a totally different level of player in terms of depth too.
D'Anton Lynn is returning to his alma mater. Welcome home, Coach Lynn. He's going to be Penn State's defensive coordinator. This was their top target for a reason. Brian already started to explain why this was the correct move for the Nittany Lions and Matt Campbell, and we're going to shed some more light on it. That's coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like college football season, the tailgates, the packed stadiums, being right in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You can open up the Game Time app and you look at upcoming college football games. Choose your favorite team. Choose a game you want to attend. You'll be surprised how fast it was to find great seats. The app is incredibly easy to use. You can go from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. And one of the best features, you'll be able to see the point of view from your selected seats before you go to buy. So if you've never been to a stadium, you've never been to a venue, knowing your point of view ahead of time, truly a game changer. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. D'Anton Lynn's coming back to Happy Valley. It's his alma mater. He played at Penn State, and then he got his break in the NFL, goes back to college, turns UCLA into an absolute juggernaut of a defensive team. They had the number one rush defense. They had the third best pass rush with 41 sacks as a team. And then total defense was number 11. And then he goes to USC. Brian, they're the critics of this move that say, well, D'Anton Lynn's not that good. He's okay. He took a UCLA defense in 1 year, was 88th in total defense, made them number 11. And again, the number one rushing defense. That doesn't happen by accident. And it's not like he did this at Texas. He did this at Ohio State. He did this at UCLA. Then, this is where people criticize Lynn and say, okay, well, that's great. But at USC, he didn't make them good enough. They reached a plateau. He took over the 121st. Can I even say best? Is that even, can I say 121st best defense? No, I'm not going to say it that way. He took a bottom 10 defense in the entire FBS and overnight turned it into the 55th best defense. Brian, that is a seismic jump. Okay, this was going to be a project. Lincoln Riley defenses have never been good. Even when he was at Oklahoma and they were winning games, it was always because they could outscore the other team. Those were not good defenses. So D'Anton Lynn, he didn't, then they did hit a plateau. They went from 55th to 47th in year 2. I understand the concerns, but let's not look at the bigger picture. Let's not ignore the bigger picture here. D'Anton Lynn was still well on his way to making this defense even better. So I'm glad he's at Penn State because the proof is there that he can turn defenses into pretty good. He can build a pretty good system instantly.
Yeah, I think the pieces are there, especially if they bring the Iowa State guys over. They can do some of that stuff pretty quick, but I'm more interested in what they do in year 2, and here's why. Give him a full year to recruit. Again, it's not hard to sell Happy Valley and the renovated stadium and all that stuff, but I also think that he'll be able to show, especially if they do get quite a few of these Iowa State kids in, hey, this is what I can do throwing it together in a blender and putting it together. Now, if we get a full year to scout and prepare for the transfer portal again and get a bunch of good freshmen, and they'll have a top 10 class next year, maybe even a top 3 class because they're going to have big numbers, I would imagine.
Quantity, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I assume some of the Iowa State guys they'll take, et cetera, will be one-year wonders. So they'll probably take 30 kids in the high school class, at least maybe 35. So with that, Penn State in year 2 will be one of the more intriguing teams in college football, maybe even a borderline team that can make the playoff. You never know. And again, what you said about the UCLA thing, I remember that. I'm like, man, UCLA has sucked on defense forever. And then they just jumped up like that. And it's like, hey, this is really impressive. So now the question is, what can he do in terms of the ability from year to year and adjust with the guys that he's got? But I know he can find talent. He's proven it. He can blend it. Penn State's a pretty easy place to do it. So I think this is going to be really, really good.
And I like that it's somebody that is there because of the sentimental value, if you will. He's not just there because it's a job. Okay, yes, it is a job. It's his career. But now it's his alma mater. Okay? You have guys that genuinely care about Penn State. And you will continue to build that out. Not everybody that's on this Matt Campbell staff is connected to Penn State, but I want to point that out, that Terry Smith is there because he likes Penn State. D'Anton Lynn is there because he likes Penn State. It's their alma mater. That adds a factor here. That is a plus in college football. I just wanted to throw that in there. As far as his defensive scheme and everything that he's going to do, he's going to literally do everything. You say put it in a blender. That is true no matter how you look at it. He is going to build out a hybrid defense because you have to. The Big Ten is so different. You are going to have to run elements of a 4-2-5. There are going to be times where you have to run a 4-3. At USC, his base defense was a 3-4. It's part of the personnel that they had. It's just what worked. It was how are you supposed to get the 120th defense to go to the middle of the 50s? By finding the best ways to maximize your personnel. So D'Anton Lynn is a mad scientist. He will make it work one way or another. He is going to, instead of saying, you guys are going to fit in my system, he says, I'm going to take my system and make it fit for you guys.
That's very, very important because a lot of coaches try to force feed everything.
Jim Knowles?
Guys, no comment. But there's a lot of guys that do that. In long term, it can work. It can. Some guys will flame out, etc. But there's still a lot of luck with that. The most successful coaches are usually, Knowles obviously is very successful, but most of them are those that adjust. That's just the way it is. And if you've got a running quarterback and you'd rather throw it, okay, look at like Kalen DeBoer last year. The quarterback didn't really fit his system, but he could run, so they ran him a bunch.
Yeah.
That was just what they did. That's just one example. Mm-hmm. But you have to be able to do that on defense too. And like, this year, USC had some pass rushers. I don't know how many they'll have at Penn State this year. Probably not as many.
We'll see.
I bet they use more of the Iowa State stuff in year 1 than they will any other year that he's at Penn State. They're going to have to scheme it up and confuse people after the snap with movement. It'll be a very confusing defense and probably even for some of the players, but they're not going to just line up and kill everybody with their talent. So they're going to do that. But he'll adapt. And again, once they get a little bit more talent, they can just sick them. Play more 4-2-5, drop 7, rush 4, and a little bit more traditional Penn State defense.
Defensive line is the priority. Brian, we're going to have more conversations about that in due time, whether it's defensive ends or your favorite position group, defensive tackle. That's what's held Penn State back from being, even good or great in the past couple of years to being elite. It takes a few defensive tackles. So last thing we'll say about D'Anton Lynn here, Brian, I'm eager to see how this goes because Penn State still needs a linebackers coach, a defensive line coach. And honestly, by the time this recording goes up, this podcast, Penn State might have made some additional coaching moves. I'm eager to see who Lynn is able to bring with him, if he's able to bring anybody, because my expectation, this is just my honest assessment, is he has flown solo most of the time. He didn't bring anyone with him to UCLA, as far as I'm concerned. He didn't bring anybody, and maybe I'm incorrect, but the last time I checked, he didn't bring anybody to UCLA with him. He didn't bring anybody to USC with him. That could be different this time around. Again, Penn State needs a defensive line coach. Well, could you potentially convince USC's defensive line coach to follow you? When I talked to Mark Culkin of Locked On USC, D'Anton Lynn, guess who he admires? Guess who he respects? Rex Ryan, because he got his break in the NFL with the Jets. he gave him his first break, Rex Ryan, when he was the head coach of the Jets. Guess who was the linebackers coach at USC? Rob Ryan.
There you go.
I'm just saying, I do think because USC, they can compete. They can give those guys pay raises, more guarantees. It's going to be difficult to poach multiple assistants off that USC staff, especially when they have no connections to Penn State like Lynn does. But it's just something worth watching. As far as players go, look, as much as, hey, Lynn's a great recruiter, he's a great closer. Okay. He's not the guy that is going to directly do home visits and everything else because he's the coordinator. That's just not his job. I'd be surprised if any players end up following and transferring because of D'Anton Lynn to Penn State. I don't think that's going to happen one way or another.
Yeah, I don't know if he'll bring a ton of players over, but even if he just brought like some back office guys, different people that could help him install the defense, that'd be, of course, Ryan would be great. But I bet you he brings one or two guys, and it doesn't just have to be SC that he's worked with. Might be a guy that's working with the Jets right now or somebody from the NFL. His connections are pretty darn deep. That's another great storyline because if you don't have the right coaching pieces to make it work with all these different guys coming from different schools, you won't even come close to maximizing your ability in year one. And it'd be nice for Penn State to go to a good bowl game at least. Who knows? Maybe more, but if they can get the right people together, why couldn't they win 9 or more games? You never know.
Curt Cignetti did it. They went 10-2, made the college football playoff. I'm not saying that's the likely result, but it is definitely a possibility if Matt Campbell gets a lot of the transfer portal correct, which is very well the case if you can load up on Iowa State players and retain some of those key Penn State players, as we've discussed here throughout the show. Matt Campbell making all the right decisions as it stands currently. We'll see and follow up in due time. He is Brian Smith, host of The Portal, and does makes a lot of contributions here to the Locked On Podcast Network as our college football expert. My name is Zach Seyko, your host of Locked On Nittany Lions. Subscribe to both of our shows and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around all things the transfer portal and Penn State. Brian, it's great to connect with you again. Happy New Year, and can't wait to do this again a lot more in 2026.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.